Hello and welcome to week 6 of CCJO 3389. This is Frontier Law and Justice. I had to come into Texarkana today because out there at the lake where we're hanging out, there is no internet connection, so I can't get to this lecture, can't do this video. So I've come into the lovely Starbucks, and I'm going to disturb everybody that's sitting around trying to watch their own shows and eat their food and everything. But I did come outside. So anyway, this week's discussion is going to be about Deadwood. And Deadwood is a real place. HBO made this series about Deadwood that was all cuss words and sex and nudity and violence, and uh, most of it was fictionalized. And they brought in a whole lot. And what made the TV series and made the TV show Deadwood so difficult to understand or to believe is because they used real people, and they used the real characters, or a lot of the real characters, within the show, and then they made this story. Deadwood is a real place. It really existed. It's in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Originally it was part of the Sioux Reservation treaty land. And some frontiersman, some explorer was going through, and he was panning the river. He was panning the Potato Creek, and he found gold, and it popped off this humongous gold rush, and all kinds of people were trying to show up, and they were trying to become part or get wealthy and get rich. George Randolph Hearst ended up out there, Wild Bill Hicock and Calamity Jane, and the Earps spent some. Everybody is just showing up, and they're going out there and they're trying to make their millions. They're panning for gold. And then there was E.B. Farnum. I know the TV show has Farnum. Hold on a second. I don't have a whole lot of. Let's just dismiss this. Here we go. I'm sorry. I don't have a whole lot of light. I can't really see my screen because it's bright outside, and this is a school's computer, and they've got the settings to where I can't make the screen any brighter. It's rather irritating, unless I'm inside. But E.B. Farnum shows up, and he's not a searcher for gold. What he does is he creates the very first general store, and then he becomes mayor, and he runs the place. But there is no law. There are no cops. There's no police. There's no law enforcement. There's a small little Chinatown, and there's a lot of pigs, feral hogs and regular domesticated hogs. The town of Deadwood uh, prided itself in the fact that it was lawless and you could do whatever you want. In about 1877 or so, uh, Charlie Utter is the one that turned Deadwood into a huge community. Uh, he brought 30 wagons and a wagon train into the Badlands, into the Black Hills of South Dakota. And with him, he brought Wild Bill Hickok, and he brought Calamity Jane, and he brought Madam Mustache, and he brought the prostitutes, and he brought people who are wanting to pan for gold, and they're miners and mining for gold. Shortly thereafter, George Randolph Hearst shows up. George Randolph Hearst is a philanthropist. He first discovered gold outside of San Francisco in 1857, and he became rich. He then went to the gold mines, and the gold lands in the rushes that were found in Montana, and he established the Comstock mine, and then he went to Deadwood, and I forget the name of the mine that he had there in Deadwood. But by the time that in 1894, when Deadwood burned to the ground, George Randolph Hearst was valued at $1.9 billion. He gave a lot of that money away because he remembered about how he was poor and how he struggled and how he was broke. He was absolutely devastatingly, broke in 1857 when he first discovered gold. He was eating at the generosity of others. He was sleeping in the streets or in the fields or wherever he laid down his head. And I found, I was in Texarkana yesterday, and the amount of homeless here in Texarkana and the amount of poverty and the amount of poor is heartbreaking, heart-wrenching. But here we are, nonetheless. So this is a lawless town, and what attracted Wild Bill Hicock to this town was he was an alcoholic, just like Calamity Jane, and he liked to gamble, and he was really good at it. He was really, really good at gambling and playing poker. But the alcohol would get in his way, and he would lose a lot of his money because he did. He humiliated a man by the name of Jack McCall. And Jack McCall, he took every dime Jack McCall had. And let me back up a second. Charlie Utter, Colorado Charlie Utter, was best friends with Wild Bill Hicock. And he's the one that helped control his drinking and control his gambling. Wild Bill Hicock, if you do some research and you look into Wild Bill Hicock, he's got this reputation of being this amazing lawman, and he brought law everywhere he went, but he didn't want to do that here in Deadwood. He wanted to gamble, he wanted to drink. By the time of Wild Bill Hicock's death, it's estimated that he had killed over 70 people, all behind the badge or in self-defense. He had a reputation as being a fast gun, a fast gun. And anybody that would come against him would find themselves dead. And you're going to find this every time you do anything, really. His real name was James Butler Hicock. They called him Wild Bill. He was killed on August 2nd, 1876. He had been in the Dakota territories for a little while. They say that he was married to Calamity Jane, but the only recorded marriage that he had was to Angus Thatcher Lake. And so Calamity Jane and Wild Bill Hicock were these drunks that were traveling around. Calamity Jane was a prostitute posing as the wife of Wild Bill Hicock. This goes back to the discussion we've had all this time. These famous gunmen, these famous heroes of our West were married and hung out with prostitutes. And prostitution was allowed in Deadwood, starting in, if he arrived in 76, I would say if he died, he was killed in 76, which means he showed up in 75. I forget. I know I'm just reading this here. And Joseph G. Rosa says that, and he's the official biographer of Wild Bill Hicock, said that he only killed 6 or 7 men. But if you go to the legends of the West, you know, that's 60 or 70 men that he killed. Well, he always kept his back to the wall, and so that he could see who was coming in, kind of like me. You know, there's a wall behind me. Although I've got people come after me here, people come after me here, and then they just come out of Starbucks and get me too. But Wild Bill Hicock always sat with his back to the wall. This one day he shows up to a poker game. He wants to play. He's been drinking, and he absolutely humiliates John McCall, or Jack McCall, and takes him for everything that he has. And then the legend has it that Wild Bill Hicock gives a silver dollar or a 2-bit piece, or he gives $5. He gives some portion of money to John McCall and says, "Here, go buy yourself something to eat, take a bath, and sober up, and come back, and we can play some more." John McCall walks outside. He borrows a gun from a friend, walks back into the bar, walks to the back of Wild Bill Hicock, 1 bullet to the back of the head. His body went unclaimed for a few days. It was eventually because Charlie Utter was not in town. Him and Hicock and Utter created this stage line, this transport company that would bring freight and goods from Deadwood to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and he was on one of those trips. So when he shows up, he files a claim and makes a claim for the body. Most of the bodies that were killed in Deadwood were just fed to the pigs. And the pigs ate well. They would eat all remnants of the body. So murder 101, if you're going to kill somebody, make sure you do it near a pig farm so you can get rid of the body, because the pigs will destroy it for you. I don't even know that the pigs will leave any trace of DNA once they're done. God's earth cleaner is what pigs are. Anyway, at the same time, there's a man who's coming to Deadwood. He's coming from Montana. He was actually born in Ontario. And then in the 60s, he moves to Montana, following gold, a prospector just like everybody else. And he forms a friendship with Solomon Starr. Solomon Starr is a hardware store owner in Billings, Montana. And this man, his name is Seth Bullock. Seth Bullock becomes a U.S. Marshal, and he starts enforcing the law. And he becomes friends with George Randolph Hearst, who's also in the area with the Comstock mine, making a fortune, billions and billions of dollars. You may know his great-granddaughter. No, his granddaughter, great-granddaughter, Patty Hearst. She was involved in the 1960s, and again, I'm wrong. It was his granddaughter. It was Patty Hearst. George Hearst in the 1880s would get into gambling, and he was a big gambler, and he won big and ended up winning a newspaper. The San Francisco Chronicle was the paper that he owned. And then the Hearsts, his son, William Randolph Hearst, would turn that newspaper into a humongous media conglomerate. And that $1.9 billion he gave to his son became several billions of dollars with the media empire built from George Hearst, who was in Deadwood. The Earps went up to Deadwood because it was lawless, and the legend has it the Earps tried to show up to become lawmakers and lawkeepers in Deadwood, and they were run out of town. 2 days after Wild Bill Hicock arrives or is killed there in August of '76. 2 days later, Seth Bullock and Solomon Starr, show up in Deadwood. Solomon Starr has a reputation. He killed his first man while he's in Billings, Montana. He has a reputation of being a gunfighter and a gunman. He stood 6 foot tall. He was 300 pounds of muscle and meat. Okay, I'm 6'3". I used to be 300 pounds, but that's all fat. Now I'm down to 218, which makes me really happy. I'm 218 pounds now. I could not imagine myself being 300 pounds of muscle. I can't see it happening. But he had these steel gray eyes that could stare down and tame a pit viper. It was said of him that a cobra could face down, could be face to face, eye to eye with Seth Bullock, and the cobra would run away. He and E.B. Farnham, the mayor, when Bullock showed up to town, him and Starr created and built a hardware store. It was a tent store. And eventually they turned that tent store into a regular wood wall store, hardware store. And they would sell prospecting materials, and they would sell wood. And because Deadwood was growing, the construction was important. So Seth Bullock and Saul Starr wanted to meet that need. They did a little bit of prospecting, but mainly they were there to meet the needs of the prospectors and the miners and the prostitutes that were found in Deadwood. He wanted to avoid being a lawman. He'd been a lawman in Montana, and he just didn't want to have that job or do that anymore. Well, E.B. Farnham, the mayor, eventually talked him into becoming the sheriff. And he became sheriff, and him and E.B. Farnham brought law to Deadwood, or controlled chaos to Deadwood. And he did this without killing anybody. He pistol whipped a few people, he beat up a few people, he had a reputation, but he did nothing in the world or the realms of killing. There was no story of Seth Bullock running around killing all of his enemies. Seth Bullock was just that. Seth Bullock was a, where's my mouse? Hold on a second. I've lost my mouse again. There it is. All right. He tamed Deadwood. He controlled Deadwood. He organized the prostitution of Deadwood into one block. This one block had estimates of 60 brothels where the prostitutes would ply their trade. These prostitutes, these brothel owners like Madam Mustache, would bring charity and would help the people that would lose their lives. You know, they lost everything looking for gold. They weren't as lucky as Hearst and some of the others that made millions and millions of dollars out of Deadwood. But this week's discussion is to focus on Seth Bullock. You know, I never knew anything about Seth Bullock until, you know, I started looking into Deadwood. Started looking into Deadwood because of the TV show. And I found that so much of the TV show was fictionalized. And it was wrong. But here I am. I am finishing up this week, let's have a good discussion on how men like Seth Bullock were able to tame lawless towns like Deadwood without killing anybody. Okay, so that's it for this week. I'll see you in the forums.